answered.
All right, wonderful. Welcome, everybody. This is the RESNA Wheelchair Service Provision Guide. I am Vince Schiappa. I will be moderating today's session and I will provide the CEU code at the end of the session in the chat, and I will come back online and say it, so make sure everybody has it. Before we get started, please remember to mute yourself, and questions can be asked using the chat feature and will be addressed at the end of the session. I will go ahead and turn it over to Mary Shea Stifel and Jessica Presperin Pedersen, and these are going to be your presenters for the session.
Good morning. So today we're going to be talking about the Wheelchair Service Provision Guide. And this is a project that developed out of the RESNA Special Interest Group, Wheeled Mobility and Seating. And so many of the people on our team were involved in the original project back in 2008, 2007 timeframe, and it was published in 2011 on the RESNA website. And today, Jessica and I want to actually introduce you to the Wheelchair Service Provision Guide and some of the updates that we've been working on over the last 2 years with a group of people from, again, the RESNA Special Interest Group. So just so we know who we are, Jessica and I don't have any, we don't have any financial disclosures to develop. So we don't work with any particular companies that are represented in this guide. And so as we reflect on what the objectives are for our session, we wanted to make sure that everyone here understood, okay, what is this Wheelchair Service Provision Guide? What are the different components of it? Why do we need it in our industry? And then what are 3 strategies we could use to improve current clinical practice with wheelchair service provision? So who's in our audience? When we think about our audience, you know, we know the ISS represents all the various stakeholders that are involved in the wheelchair service provision process. We have clients, we have therapists, clinicians, we have engineers who are involved in developing the products. We have researchers. We have manufacturers who are creating and manufacturing various products depending on need. We have the medical doctors who are involved in the treatment team. And then, of course, we have case managers and funding source individuals who are concerned, hopefully, about their clients and looking to put money out there to help fund a particular product that a client needs or the services they need to make sure that the product works optimally for them.
So the reason why we're doing this provision guide, why we started it in the first place, and what we want to accomplish by that, I think you need to go back 1 slide, Mary.
Okay.
Yep, right there. Is that we still have people who use wheelchairs who are still having pain and discomfort. They have pressure injuries. They also have some injuries that may result in ER visits. And so, and those ER visits might be because of equipment condition, because they don't understand how to use the equipment in all the different environments, so they fall out of the chair, and they don't understand how to maintain or care for their wheelchair and seating system. Next. And then the issues with inappropriate equipment are the wheelchair is not matching their needs, their physiological needs. It's not giving them the ability to have functional potential. And it also may not have been prescribed and recommended to allow for progressive diagnoses. And one of the key things that we have happening now is that the process often ends with delivery of the product. And so what happens after that delivery, a lot of times we're not seeing the correct follow-up and maintenance that needs to happen. Next slide.
The PowerPoint has frozen for some reason.
Okay, so some of the challenges in getting an appropriate wheelchair are, of course, financial. We all know that funding can be an issue, and if people don't have any insurance at all, it's a big issue. Access to qualified professionals, we're the choir, and we know that there's very limited clinics in even major cities like I'm in, like Chicago, but smaller rural areas, there's a lack of professionals that can provide the evaluation, the documentation needed to get the proper equipment. And so the last is the stakeholders don't fully understand the process. Case managers, educators, the wheelchair users themselves, and suppliers and therapists that aren't familiar with complex seating also don't fully understand the process. The committee that we've established includes clients, clinicians, researchers, physicians, PTs, OTs, rehab engineers, suppliers, and manufacturers. And we've all come together, and Mary will start explaining that process.
Okay. So what is the wheelchair service provision guide? It's a best practice approach that's a framework for what should go into optimal wheelchair service delivery. One of our biggest goals was that we have it written in such a way as to educate everyone, all stakeholders, to enable them to understand what should go into optimal wheelchair service delivery. Inherent throughout that whole document and our practice is that it's always going to be a client-centered approach. So as a team, we reflected on the industry and what the purpose of such a document would be. And as such, our development goals were to develop a uniform best practice document that's designed to ensure that all stakeholders understand what good service, wheelchair service delivery encompasses, regardless of the setting or the funding that client is getting their services met in. We also wanted to maximize the consumer access to optimal wheelchair service delivery. So that goes along with that whole education process. So as we reflected on the costs and client safety, we thought about the astounding number of people who end up in emergency rooms throughout the country because of a wheelchair-related injury. This is really surprising. Why is it when we have such quality technology, we have educated consumers, we have knowledgeable suppliers, we have incredible access on the web in terms of YouTube videos and all types of resources, but it still comes down to that clients are simply just not aware of some simple procedures. Like, who do I call when I need a repair? When something goes wrong? What happens when I buy it online? What are some of the trade-offs with that? And what are typical maintenance that needs to be done on my wheelchair? So at least two of our goals then for the wheelchair service provision guide was to increase client safety and to minimize their risk of injury, as well as to minimize product abandonment and wasteful spending that occurs because a product may not be the optimal client for a particular client. So who would benefit from a guide like this? It's all of us. It's every stakeholder who's involved in the wheelchair service provision process. It's the consumers, it's the family members, again, the caregivers, because now they have an understanding of what should go into it. So that's how the guide's written. It's written so that every one of us can go through the process in this stepwise system and just have an understanding of, okay, this is what should be happening at this point in time. This includes all the stakeholders who are making decisions in terms of policies, case managers who are helping to fund the products, as well as the clients, the family members, and the clinicians. So, because as we have newer clinicians constantly entering the marketplace, they're learning all the time. There's only so much that you learn in school with a foundation. So this document can help provide them and guide them with some information as to, okay, this is what I should be doing at this part of the process. This is where I need to be helping my client at that particular stage. So throughout the wheelchair service provision guide, we use terminology from the ICF. And most of the methodology was extensive collaborative expert opinion. We had in the original version of the guide, we had from conference calls weekly from 2008 to 2010 to get consensus on the content. And then we, of course, used whatever available literature there was at the time. Today, we've been working on this guide since 2020, and our conference calls are 2 to 3 times a month, one time a month with the full group. And then we have 2 separate work groups that are in action. One of them is the literature review group, and the second is the outcomes review group, just making sure that that's represented throughout the content. And of course, updating our literature review. So as we looked at the literature review, we moved on now from some of the literature we had in some of the past work to 2012 to today. And in order to really get all the different aspects of wheelchair service provision, it wasn't just one literature search. It actually was 11 different, at least 11 different literature searches, looking at wheelchairs as a title, and then looking at the benefits and looking at different guidelines that are out there, looking at like the evaluation process, procurement, different adverse events or poor outcomes that are happening because of wheelchairs, any abandonment that's connected with the title or the term wheelchair. We also wanted to look at some clinical decision-making that goes into the process. What do people think? What's expert consensus out there? What about the fitting and the training? Also repairs and maintenance, and just simply the word provision. And we looked on both PubMed and CINAHL as databases for this. So when we looked at the wheelchair service provision guide and the 8 steps that we originally came up with, we reflected on it, and we still felt as a team very firmly that these 8 steps are an essential part of the process. And the process starts with the referral, and it ends kind of with the follow-up maintenance and repair. And then the outcome measurement is throughout each of the steps, because of course, when you're doing outcomes, you need to be taking them in each of the different steps for different reasons at each point in time. And so now Jessica is going to start looking and going through the first few steps. And then I'll continue with that and just explain what goes into or what encompasses the content in those steps. And then we'll sum it up at the end.
So before I say anything, I just want to say Mary has been leading this. She led the last one. She's reading this one. She's keeps us all together. She's the yin to everybody else's yang. And so it's been a great process. And I appreciate everything she's done, because I wouldn't be able to do it. So the referral is, so why we're doing this today, by the way, is to get you up to par on what's happening and then pull in reviewers, and Mary will go through that process. So what I wanted to do was just kind of go through some of the titles of our provision guide, and the first is referral. And so we're talking about referral, identification of the need. Is there a screening process? What's the complexity? Are they going to a qualified professional? We're going to have suggestions on that's needed if the person's complex. And then talking about the clinician and the supplier team. And then followed by that would be the assessment. And as Mary said before, what we wanted to do was make sure that we were inclusive of the world, and we wanted to include ICF domains. And so we made sure that just as our past guide, this guide still followed the ICF domains. And so we split it up into body, function, and structures, and then moved into activities and participation, and then finally talked about the environment and then current technology. Next slide. So for the assessment part of it, and again, we know we're talking to the choir, we want you to put in if we're missing anything. So we're going to go through body function and structures, then pull into activity and participation, then what's their current technology and the environment that they're going to be using, and then the current technology that they're using for mobility, and then environments for use. And we'll get into family, social support, caregivers, and attitudes towards disability and technology. So do they want to use it? Why do they want to use it? How are they going to use it? Next. So what we're doing, as everybody else does that does seating and positioning evaluations, is looking at the MAT assessment and alignment, measurements, what their posture is. We want people to know to focus on skin integrity and everything that's involved with that. So what's their current skin? Do they have any scars? Do they have a history of pressure sores or any history of surgery related to pressure sores? And then activities. And that's okay, Mir. So for neuromuscular system, strength, range, tone, everything that you would think of is what we would want you to document so that you have all the medical justification that's going to be able to justify the complexity of the systems that we're recommending. Next step, next slide. And then getting into participation. And so here's where we really want to incorporate how that technology is going to be used so that the third-party payers, the users, anybody else will have an understanding of the use of the equipment and why it's so important that they have the equipment that they're going to be using. So eating, grooming, dressing, bathing, all the ADLs, and then all the IDLs, telephone use, parenting, caring for animals, house cleaning, laundry, all of that. If you can incorporate into the eval, we're recommending that you do. And again, I want to keep saying, we know we're speaking to the choir here, but this is for everybody. This is a guide that we really want people that aren't familiar with seating and positioning assessments to be able to read and understand. Next slide. Oh, is this still me? Sorry. So, yoo-hoo. So we're going to be looking at the current technology that they have, that they're using for mobility. So you'll be able to see how old it is. You'll be able to see the condition that it's in. So we're asking to look at the manufacturer, the model, the age, serial number, the condition of the equipment, why the equipment is not working. So what are their limitations? Any technology that they're using in conjunction with the equipment. Next slide. And then, oh, that's hilarious. Okay. Then assessments for environment of use. So the family, social support, caregivers, who's assisting with the performance of transfers? How are they doing that? How are they being positioned in the wheelchair? Do they have an understanding of the maintenance? And then the attitudes towards disability and technology. This is really important. And this is when we're trying to incorporate person-centeredness and their choice and why they want the equipment. And so consider the choices, consider, are they going to accept the equipment? If they accept the equipment, chances are they'll use it more. What is their tolerance for change, especially if you're recommending something that they may not have thought that they really needed, and how to have that conversation, and then the ability to support complex devices. Next slide. Oh, mute.
Hello, back. So as we transition into the equipment recommendation and selection section, that's where we're taking all this information from the evaluation, from the assessment process. And we're generating a list of like the client's medical and functional requirements and what their mobility challenges and goals are. And so we're taking that information and then we're taking a look at the various products that are out there and then discussing the advantages and disadvantages of different products. Throughout this process, we're having the client very involved in terms of what products are out there, what are the pros and cons of the different products. And as anybody knows who's worked with me, I constantly am reiterating like the Jose A. Banks commercial, an educated consumer is our best customer. And I totally believe that with my heart and soul, because then we all understand why we're making different decisions. And so I feel throughout this whole process, and it's not only what I feel, but the group also felt pretty strongly that it's all about educating the client here. Really strong emphasis on the client being very involved in the equipment process and understanding the different products that are out there. And then as we transition to the next step is what's going on with their funding source. Is this a funding source who's very receptive to all the different needs that the client has, or are there going to be some challenges with that? What does the funding source require? Any predeterminations, that type of stuff? What are their limitations, or what are their advantages as we're looking at the different options for a particular client? And as we're looking at these options, we don't limit what we educate or show people because of their funding source. We make sure that that's included in the discussion, because then of course people have made, and they can make decisions about what they do with other funding sources that they may be able to obtain to get that optimal product for them. And then throughout this equipment recommendation selection process, there's strong documentation in terms of what does the client need, why do they need it, and why are lower cost options or alternative options not chosen. And sometimes there, and often actually, never mind sometimes, there are products in the same code for clients, but we'll choose one over the other simply because it meets their lifestyle needs better. And so it's really important to make sure that we're doing that really thorough evaluation, like Jessica said, and then we bring that information into the equipment recommendation and selection section. And then as we go through the next part of it, it's the funding and procurement, where everything now is being submitted to the actual insurance company. And who's doing that? It's different in different service settings and different funding environments. And so once the funding then is secured, what's happening with the equipment? So at the ordering and receiving equipment step, the person who's ordering it, which is in most of the funding source, in most of the traditional practice settings, it's the supplier. So when the supplier is ordering the equipment, we want to make sure that that's when the quotes are being reviewed. We also take a look at what was the time frame that the funding process took. And if it was an exorbitant time frame, then we want to maybe go back and touch base with the client a little bit in terms of if anything has changed before we press the button and do the final order on some of the equipment. And then also, if certain items weren't approved by the funding source, what were those items? Is there an opportunity for the client to purchase or get other funding for those items? Or do we have to go back and take a look at the product and make some other changes? So that's what's happening during this funding and procurement process. And then once the button's pushed to order the equipment, we transition to the next phase. And so the next phase is once the equipment now comes into that supplier, what happens at that point? And so technically a supplier or a manufacturer, depending on the practice setting, is going to be looking at all the specifications that were written for that client, and they start to set things up. Often when we're ordering a particular mobility product, the seating system may come from a different manufacturer and the headrest say from a third manufacturer. And so it depends on what's happening with the client's needs, but there's a lot of products coming in and it's all being assembled and set up and configured to that client's needs. If there's an ultralight chair, sometimes we'd be adjusting the center of gravity, or if something did not come in as per specified for the client once the back support was on it, or if it was a power product, a particular power product that had higher level electronics on it because a client had some issues in terms of tremors, or they had some more challenges in terms of needing alternative controls such as a sip and puff system. All that pre-programming would be done at this product preparation step. And then after that, we'd be transitioning into the fitting, training, and delivery process. And this is the process where now we're back in front of the client again. Here we are, and we're getting them into the product, and we're making sure that we do all those adjustments and making sure it supports their seating system needs in terms of alignment or stability or stability. Also pressure distribution. Do they feel comfortable, safe? And we start doing all those adjustments in terms of the both the seating system and the wheelchair at that fitting process. And then the training and the delivery part of it is making sure that the client understands all the different components of the chair, how to use it, where are they using it, to make sure that they're safe in maybe that initial environment of use. And then they may need to be coming back for additional training. But before they take it home, can they use it? Can they maneuver it in that tight elevator that they need to get into their home, or up the van ramp into their van? And so sometimes that could be a higher level skill and may warrant that this training process and delivery process takes more than one appointment. And so the amount of time spent in this process really is dependent upon each individual's specific needs and how complex they are. And of course, if they are using this chair for the first time as a first-time product, or if it's something that it's their third or fourth chair, there's definitely a different level of expertise at that point. After the client takes the wheelchair home and is using it, then we have the 7th step of the process. And that's the follow-up maintenance and repair part of this process. And so the follow-up is an ongoing process. And it's something that when we were in that delivery phase, we educated the client that, hey, if you have any changes, if something's different, or as you get more proficient with your wheelchair skills, you would be coming back and we would potentially doing additional adjustments. So we just want to make sure that clients are being educated on that during that delivery process. So they're aware, okay, there is more here. This isn't one and done. I just don't have the chair and there's nothing more to it. I'm going to really learn how to use this product. I'm going to understand how to use it out in all my different environments that are out there. And if I need additional training to do that, like higher level wheelchair mobility skills training, to be able to go up and down curbs or up and down a step or two, et cetera, that these resources are available to us in this particular practice setting. Also, if any changes are needed, because if a client has a particular diagnosis where they may be fortunately losing some function, that we would be there for them to help then adjust the wheelchair and seating system accordingly to make sure that they can function as independently and safely as possible. So that includes diagnoses such as muscular dystrophy, ALS, MS, those type of diagnoses. And then along those lines as well as for pediatrics, for children and for young adults. When is their growth spurt? You know, sometimes people can, you know, you've all had experiences, or we've all had experiences where some kids will grow like 6 inches in 1 year. Well, then that warrants a significant change in the seating system and making sure that that follow-up part of the process is there. Also, the maintenance and repair process. That's an ongoing process throughout. And at what point is it skilled intervention, where we have the clinicians needing to be there, helping to educate the clients in terms of what would be an optimal maintenance schedule for their particular product, and potentially how to do some adjustments themselves, or for family members to do adjustments that may be something that's a regular occurrence. And so there's regular maintenance that should be happening on a daily standpoint, then a monthly standpoint, and also an annual standpoint. So making sure the client knows, like, well, who do I go to for what? And when do I need to go back to the supplier who provided this product so that I can get a more professional tune-up? And so just making sure they're fully aware of that maintenance schedule and that timely repairs are done. For the follow-up maintenance and repair process, one thing I also want to make sure is that, you know, we are really strongly advocating that clients initiate this. But of course, this should be or can be initiated by any member of the treatment team. And that includes, sometimes it's the technician from the wheelchair supplier who's out at the client's home, and they're noticing that the seating's not fitting right, or that this part has broken 3 times already. We have to take a different look at this, and it needs to go back to the original treatment team. So any member of the the stakeholders or any member of the team can initiate this part of the process and should initiate it as needed. And then, as I was saying, the outcome measurement is something that actually happens throughout the whole process, right? And you have two different types of outcome measurements. You have outcome measurements that are looking at the actual product and does it meet the client's needs and goals, and is it helping to enhance their function and maximize their participation? And then also outcome measures that are actually looking at the process. How quick was this process? What was the start of it? When was the client feeling competent with this product and using it and popping up and down curbs and doing wheelies to navigate that outdoor environment? So looking at both the process and at the actual product, as well as looking often at some of the individual steps as we're going through them. And so the outcome measures are involved in each of the steps. And there are outcome measures that can be used to help clients decide, hey, this is a product, I think this product's a little better than that product because of. And so sometimes we're using those outcome measures, such as interface pressure mapping or a home trial, et cetera. And when we do that, that would be part of the equipment trial. So outcome measurement is throughout the entire process. It's very client-centered, and it is not just a step at the end. It's a step that's actually incorporated throughout each of the steps of the wheelchair service provision process. So after we came up with and reviewed all our content for the 8 steps of the wheelchair service provision guide, we took a look at the case studies that we have. And we had 3 case studies initially in the initial guide. And we looked at the ages of the clients. Of course, we looked at the diagnoses of the clients, the practice settings that the client was seen in, as well as the products that clients were getting in those case studies. And so as we reflected on it, we realized that we actually had a gap, and we felt we really didn't represent the pediatric client population enough as current practice is. And so we added another case study, and Jessica will be discussing that one pretty soon. But what we thought right now is, let me go through the 4 different case studies, and then you can see how we thought these were case studies that would just illustrate the different steps of the guide, showing how the wheelchair service provision guide would work throughout each of these steps. And then near and dear to my heart is the case study 1, because this is a very typical client that I work with on a daily basis. So a potential client who's, say, 38 years old with a spinal cord injury at the T8 level. And this client has an injury that's is 20 years old at this point. So he was injured 20 years ago when he was 17 or 18 years old. And current situation for this client is that he's starting to have some pain. Pain in his elbows, in his shoulders, in his hands. And it's because of just normal daily activities and just the overuse that's associated with using an ultralight wheelchair and using your arms for all of your functioning, because we know arms weren't designed to be our mobility devices, right? They were designed for a function, and using them to actually perform many of our activities of daily living and our leisure activities. And now we're asking people to mobilize themselves and use them every minute and hour of the day when they want to transition from one surface to another. And so this client has started to have some pain. It's not everyday pain, but it's occasional pain. And sometimes it's pain that lasts for a month, and then he gets some therapy and it goes away. And so his goals are to have a lot less pain. And he really wants to continue to use his car for transportation, because the cost of a van at this point for him is just overwhelming, because he has some young children and he's thinking about college tuitions, et cetera. And so when we look at his current mobility device, it was an ultra lightweight chair. And as we look at different options and the technology that's now available for our clients, we realize, hey, there's some more technology out there that can actually help decrease some of the strain on his upper limbs. And so after we go through the whole process, we end up with an ultralight wheelchair. So a similar type wheelchair, configured similarly, but we end up with maybe a more pressure distributing cushion because he is getting a little older, a little bit better or supportive back support. And we added on some power assist technology. And the practice setting that this client was seen in was in an outpatient hospital-based wheelchair clinic. And once we received all the products, we did actually a little more extensive training because there was some new technology involved there. We wanted to make sure he was as proficient as possible with it so that it really did maximize his ability to participate and be really involved in his family life and lifestyle. So that was our case study number one. And then Jessica's going to go through the other 3 case studies and just show how they illustrate different populations and different clients that we're all working with.
So we wanted to get a school setting. And so this is Jada, and she's African-American and is in the process of transitioning to high school. And she was using an ultralight weight wheelchair, but she was having to have help getting over thresholds, heavy duty carpeting, up curbs. So she wasn't as functional in the ultralight as they had wanted her to be. And now that she's moving into a high school setting and it's going to be a larger environment, she's going to have to go a lot further. They were looking at a different device. They do have a minivan with a ramp, and so they would be set for power. So for this one, we wanted to make it more complex. So there's complex positioning involvement, and our assessment talks about significant subluxation, posterior pelvic tilt, kyphosis, some scoliosis, all of which is reducible to a point and still needs a lot of support. So she's got the ability to sit up with assist. And so what we wanted to do was to go into a high-end power wheelchair. We wanted to incorporate a lot of the seat functions. And so tilt, recline, elevating leg rest, seat elevation, and anterior tilt to help with transfers. And then as we got into the seating, we did customized seating to support the trunk in a position for function, and then to accommodate for the subluxation and some of the pelvic obliquity and posterior pelvic tilt to the reducible point. The fitting and training session, of course, she's going to have to learn power. It's going to be needed to be programmed for the different environments that she's going to be using, and then demonstrate the functionality with seat elevation and going into tilt and going into recline, and then showing her how the anterior tilt is going to help with the transfers. And so this is our one where we really wanted to focus on the complexity, using the therapist, using the rehab technology supplier, working with the family, working with the girl going into high school and what her needs and wants are, as far as, is she going to use the equipment? Does she want power? Does she see the benefits of power? And is going to buy into that whole thing. And so that's kind of how we focused on all the different aspects for this particular case study. Next. So now we had to get somebody older. I'm a little offended by 75 because, as we get older, 75 seems pretty young to me right now. But we wanted to look at that type of individual. So now an older person, and now the therapist in the therapy setting in the school was the school therapist, and now we're moving into a home health setting. And so we wanted to capture the different types of settings that were available to do the evaluation. So this is home health. The woman has a CVA. She has right hemiplegia. She was provided with a standard wheelchair. And as we all know and are frustrated by the heaviness of a standard wheelchair, it doesn't provide any type of adjustability for propulsion. God forbid you have to transfer that chair into a car. And so she had a lot of therapy. She's still not a functioning ambulator. The goals are for her to have more independent mobility, and especially getting over the carpets and the thresholds in her home, which were really difficult. And so now we're looking at new ultralight wheelchair with a lower seat to floor so that she can propel it easily with one side of her body. The adjustable axle plate will get the shoulders and pelvis in the right position. The fitting and training, we want to give her wheelchair skills. We want her to have an understanding of how to use those. And when I did home health, I will tell you, somebody would go in a wheelchair and they'd just sit there. They didn't get the reality that they were going to be able to push themselves. And so we want to really focus on the after delivery aspect, that she's going to need wheelchair skills training. She's going to have to understand how to take it apart, put it in the car, or have her spouse help put it in the car, and that type of thing. And so this was the setting and the clientele and the seating and positioning that we focused on. Next one. So lastly, we wanted to add pediatrics. And of course, with all the on-time mobility and everything that's a focus of today, we really wanted to get a case study that was going to help us to focus on that. In the Chicago area, when I was a clinician in Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and even at Easter Seals, what would happen all the time is we would get kids that were 4, 5, 6 years old. Clearly they would benefit from power, but what happened is in that 0 to 3 early intervention program, when the 0 to 3 therapist was trying to get a piece of equipment that would allow them to get on a bus and get into school at 3 years of age, inevitably they would buy an adapted stroller. And it was so frustrating because now they completely put this child in a dependent position. And now we as seating therapists had to fight the system to try to get power when insurance had already paid for a stroller system. And so I'm hoping that our education that we're doing with on-time mobility really transfers to these 0 to 3 therapists. And so that's what this whole study is about. We decided to go with a child who has spinal muscular atrophy, living in a big city, has a condominium setting. His name is Kumal. He lives with his parents, lives with his grandparents. His aunt and uncle are in a condo across the hallway. So we're making it so that the family has accessibility to transportation. They don't have a car. So we were going with that type of situation. My hope is that the 0 to 3 therapists have access to be able to try power. Hopefully they'll be able to try power toys. But the whole goal is that we would be able to provide programmable power wheelchair when the child enters school at 3 years of age, and has some supportive seating that will allow him to function with a joystick and be able to get around. The fitting would include the family, hopefully the grandparents as well, since the grandparents are in the home and will be working with this little 2-year-old during the day when his parents are working, and then training on powered mobility and how to change into different seating functions and get the child where it needs to be. And that's kind of where we're going with the case studies. Those of you that want to review the case studies, we did make them pretty extensive and explanatory so that there is a lot of understanding to what the equipment does and why we're doing it, and the different steps of all these processes and the different settings. Mayor, take over.
All righty. So I think you now have a good understanding of the 8 different steps that are involved in the wheelchair service provision guide. We had an amazing team that I've been really fortunate to work with, both the first time around and this time around. There are a lot of similar people on that team. And the most important thing to know about the team is that we really represent all the different stakeholders that are involved in the process. That was something that we went through really diligently, making sure that we had somebody who was some medical doctors on there, people who represent funding and have worked in the funding area of wheelchair service provision. Clinicians who are involved in different practice areas, including the home health, including hospital-based therapy, also school setting work, early intervention, manufacturer work, all the education that's being done. As you see today, many clinicians are involved in that, and some of them we're very fortunate, are on this group with us. and of course, suppliers and engineers to make sure they're also represented. And so all the different stakeholders, we have a really great committee that's representative of all of that. And that's what is making this document and made it the first time around much more robust. And so as we reflect on clinical practice, you know, I think about what's happened to all of us, with all of us over the time with the pandemic and what's changed. Because anyone who's worked with me knows that, you know, it's unheard of for a chair practically to be delivered to the home. And if it is delivered to the home, I work with some really great ATPs who then, when they do the fitting, they're taking pictures so that the team is involved in what's happening at that point in time. But with the pandemic, I know in our own practice, we've had a lot of our clients from our inpatient service and some of our outpatient clients as well, who of course were fearful to come out initially with the pandemic because they may have been more at risk. And so as a result, there was a lot of home delivery of complex rehab technology. And so now where are we at with in the industry? We're now seeing people back to finish up the part of the of helping them to use their new chairs and helping them to use them to their full capacity. And so I imagine all of us and all of our clinical practices are seeing a lot more of this right now, and we'll continue to see it for a few years to come. So that's some reflections on current practice. But as you reflect on your practice and the guide, we will be looking for clinicians and actually anybody, any of the stakeholders. We're looking for a second group of reviewers at this point. So as we look through, who would be that second group of reviewers, so that this document, once we do finish it, we're currently just finishing up our case studies and the literature review. And once that's done, we'll be looking for this second group of reviewers. So we're looking for you and many of the people on this at this conference to let us know if you'd be interested in that second level of review. And then after that, this document will be going to the RESNA board for their review and approval. And then eventually it will be going to the Assistive Technology Journal for submission. And so that just gives you a little bit of a taste of what's happening with the Wheelchair Service Provision Guide currently, the update that we started because it needed that update because of time and changes in our industry. And just want to let you know that we did leave some handouts in the, as part of this presentation. We put the full presentation, the PowerPoint, as well as the RESNA Wheelchair Service Provision Guide, and also a link to the resource here on the RESNA website. And so we wanted to open it up at this point, and I know there are 10 questions or 10 comments in the chat, so we're going to open that up. And we'd love to hear everybody's opinions and thoughts and have some discussion. So as I was looking through the chat, we get some really great comments. Thank you, everybody. So 4 questions, the way I understand it is that you should do it in the chat. So you'd write a question in the chat and then we would respond to it. So I apologize that that wasn't clearer sooner. And Denise, yes. So Denise made a comment about making sure that we use the language complex rehab technology supplier in the chat, in the document. And that was one of our biggest edits, was some of this nomenclature in terms of making sure we use consistent terminology and using the complex rehab technology supplier. So there was a lot of discussion around that and making sure that we had that word supplier in there consistently. So we still have some more. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So we'd love to hear any comments. And you guys, the comments actually in the chat are really amazing and so supportive, guys. Thank you so much. You know, this is a document. We just happen to be the group leading it, but it represents all of us on this call. We're doing it every day. And so it's exciting to put it down in writing and really try to help educate clients for what, you know, so that everyone understands, even if they don't come to see a clinician who would attend like an ISS, et cetera. And so the term, Kathy, in terms of, I think we settled on, so Kathy asked the question, what term do we use? Patient, end user, consumer, or others? And I have to, there was a lot of dialogue about this, and I think we're settling on consumer at this point. Jess, do you remember?
I think so. It was between client and consumer.
You know what it is, actually? It's client. Sorry, Kathy. Yeah, so client, and then that included, when we refer to the word client throughout the guide, it also includes the caregiver or caregivers, because often, you know, and many of us in the industry are familiar with this, is that the client, if they can't always articulate their needs clearly, it's the family member or the caregiver who's so important in helping to make decisions to make sure we really meet that client's needs. And so we did use the word client.
Yeah. And then on the CEU code, for those of you that aren't in the chat room, is IU1MC1. IU1MC1. And Teresa, I don't know, like I was answering when you asked about the FMA, and I sent it to everybody in the waiting room, so probably nobody got it, but we are going to mention a lot of the outcome measures, and FMA will be one of them. And of course, Mark's on our committee, so you knew we weren't going to miss that, but thanks.
And so there was a question from May in the chat, and she was saying, is there some kind of guideline for client, for ATPs when a client is delivered to, when a product is delivered to their home? And so so all the, I know that there are extensive documents from not only the major suppliers out there, but also NARTS, in terms of making sure there are all these checklists for clients to, for somebody who's delivering a product to the home to go through to make sure that they cover certain areas. That said, optimal delivery is really when the client is seen by the original team. So when it does have to happen at home because of maybe where the client lives or access issues or et cetera, you know, we always try to encourage that they do come back to that original treatment team wherever that work was done. And sometimes that treatment team was in the home. So we can't forget that with the home-based practice and settings. But if not, we would always ideally like that original treatment team to be involved. So then there's another, so there's a few more questions. One is, and so, yeah, so first question, let me go in order a little so I don't forget anybody. And if I do, please just put the question up again. So basically, there's a question about, let me just go through. I'm trying to just do it in the order. And so I was wondering if there were any additional considerations in the delivery process for adaptive sport mobility equipment. And so I think that would go into like the, you know, with the fitting, training, and delivery and the follow-up maintenance and repair, those processes, especially the follow-up maintenance and repair, would be just longer in the adaptive sport mobility equipment. Because of course, when people are involved in any particular sport, there is, and if it's a mobility product, like say the wheelchair for tennis, you know, the center of gravity and sometimes the camber and stuff would need to be adjusted depending on their skill level. And they're, you know, when they're new users versus as they develop expertise. So just like any equipment, I would imagine that that would be covered in that follow-up maintenance repair part of it. And unfortunately, often the sports equipment is not necessarily done in a team environment, but as much as a team can be involved, that would be ideal. And then, so we talked about the CRTS, the supplier. Hold on. Then the next is here. Do you know if a vendor will use a certain, oh, okay, we talked about that. That's the question. There's some type of a checklist when they would go to somebody's home to deliver equipment. And they do have that as just to know that. And it's available from multiple sources. There are multiple different types of checklists is what I understand. And so then the next is there a component that adds home health or outpatient therapies with assisting the client if they have equipment and opening up dialogue if they have service or maintenance on it, when it was last used, that type of stuff. And so that is all in like with the assessment process, asking them questions about the equipment. And there's some really cool technologies that are also being developed in the industry that could be part of this. And one of them, and I'm very fortunate to be involved with that, with Janet Bernstein and Barbara Kroom and Alex Benowitz from United Spinal, is the wheelchair, My Wheelchair Guide, the web app. And that's an app that's out. And there's been a lot of work done with it over the last few years. It's available on the United Spinal website. And it actually has a lot of information for the clients to fill out. And it doesn't go through all the steps of the wheelchair service provision guide. That may be something that has been something we did discuss. But basically, it has a 6-step process. But the goal of that app is for clients to go into, say, an environment where they're going for a wheelchair evaluation and be prepared for it. They have like some of the doctor, if it's a medical practice, they have the prescription if that's what's needed. And then they already have some thoughts about their wheelchair and have information about their wheelchair in an organized place where they can deliver it to or talk about it to the evaluation team with a good flow and efficiently, and not say, oh, I don't know who maintains it. You know, I don't know, is it Sunrise or Quickie? And so they at least have that information in terms of serial numbers and what's been happening with their chair, what are some of their concerns with the chair, et cetera, and what they're looking for in a new product. So that My Wheelchair Guide actually will help clients with one part of that process, which is all part of the assessment process, which Jessica went through in the beginning. So it is a part of that. And then there was a question, is there a document available to provide users with a maintenance schedule for a Group 3 power wheelchair, or is this specific to the brand selected? So this guide is more of a global guide saying that we need all this stuff. And then I know many facilities and practices actually have guides out there, like I work at Kessler Rehab, and we actually have like a one-page cheat sheet for our clients. And we just customize some of the information on the sheet for them when we're doing their fitting and training. And we'll just give them things like their serial number and then some general information about maintenance, just to give them like I always call it like a Reader's Digest guide. So they have that one sheet. And they, of course, also have the owner's manual and all. But there are a lot of resources out there. And that,
yeah,
I think
if I could just say, University of Pittsburgh developed a maintenance PowerPoint, a maintenance guide, and Anna is on this. That was her PhD dissertation, which she did a phenomenal job with. And so the publications coming out of that are great, and their PowerPoint, I don't know if it's available, is phenomenal. So they did a whole research thing on teaching consumers how to maintain their wheelchair, both a manual and a power one, that are really well done. And part of that maintenance is a schedule, as far as when you would look at your cushions, when you would look at different parts of your wheelchair, and, you know, from doing the axle and the different types of cleaning of the wheels, caster wheels, and that type of thing, to power and everything else. So Anna, if you can print, if maybe a resource there, but yeah, it's out there and it's really well done.
Yeah, and she's presented it a few times. She's presented a lot of that work from even like the Comet study and all the work she's done since. I've seen it at different conferences. So just to know that if you just Google her information, University of Pittsburgh and Anna, you'll find a lot of that information. So just people were saying like the what's on the RESNA website, until this document is still a draft and it's still being approved by all. So once it goes to that second level of reviewers as a draft and then goes to the RESNA board for approval, once it's at that stage, then it will be up on the RESNA website. Okay, and so just to know where that's going at this point. So guys, it's been fun talking to everybody. A little strange on the Zoom. I'm not used to the background, but it's interesting to watch yourself come in and out. But you know, it was really, you know, I really enjoyed just coming and bringing this information to everybody this morning and just giving you an update on what we've done and what we're doing. And I look forward to working with anybody who emails us to be like in that second level of review. Enjoy the conference. It looks pretty exciting.
Mary, you're the best.
No,
She's got
Jess,
it all together. Our leader.
Yeah, not a chance, but thank you, Jess. I work with an amazing team and that's what it's always about. You know, I was watching the University of Louisville women's basketball team. And I have to say that coach and the teamwork and that team is what has made them be so successful. And it's amazing, you know, how they work, and that's why they've risen and are so competitive at this point. So pretty exciting being down here in Louisville. Got to get into the local sports. So very fun. It's all about teamwork. Have a great conference, everyone.
Bye.